earlier videos, Professor Wörner explained how economic growth is dependent on the supply of credit. Professor Wörner, could you talk about the good and bad outcomes arising from credit creation?
Yes, in principle, credit creation is neutral. It does depend on what the money is used for, and it can give us very positive but also very negative results. Fundamentally, basically, you can divide it into three possibilities, and the first one is, let's start with the good one, the good outcome that we all want. When banks create new money, new purchasing power by extending loans, creating credit, they give the receiver the right to lay claim on limited resources. And that's, of course, where the danger also is. But if that person now receives these inputs, and there's certain key inputs that they know are valuable, if you combine them in a certain way for a new product, say.
Right.
This is basically productive investment. For example, in the implementation of new technologies. A new technology is basically a new recipe to use a certain selection of inputs in a certain way, like a cooking recipe, certain ingredients, and you combine them in a certain way, you get something nice as a result.
Right.
And if banks, by creating credit, give entrepreneurs the opportunity to implement new ideas, new technologies that have higher value than the cost of the inputs on their own, then we have created value here. This also means that there shouldn't be inflation, because you have more money through bank credit, money is created, the money supply expands when banks create credit.
Right.
But at the same time, there's also more goods and services, and therefore there's no reason why there should be inflation. So this is the desirable state of affairs, this is the desirable type of bank credit, productive credit creation. But unfortunately, there's also other types. You can see immediately if banks create credit for consumption, and because banks are not just financial intermediaries, they actually, when they give out what's called a loan, they actually create new money. But this is for consumption, the consumer loan. This means we've got more money now in the system, but the same amount of goods and services, everything else being equal.
Right.
So, of course, more money is now chasing the same amount of goods and services. There will be greater demand that will push up prices, will get inflation. This is, of course, what most people immediately think of, when we talk about credit creation or money creation, think, oh, inflation? And potentially, yes, but it does depend what the money is used for. And for basically for consumption, it's very clear it will lead to some kind of consumer price or retail price inflation.
Okay.
There's a second form of outcome that also leads to inflation, and it's also not a desirable outcome, but it may not show up in consumer prices or in retail prices. And this, of course, has been the main reason for the sort of events that are called the global financial crisis. When banks create credit and they lend this money now to speculators who use the money for financial transactions, asset transactions, what you have is money creation, new money being injected in particular markets, say the stock market or particular derivative markets or the property market. And again, it's a very simple calculation. This has to push up prices in those markets. You will get asset inflation, what is normally called a financial boom, a financial bubble. If more and more banks keep doing it, you will get a financial bubble. It's very destructive.
So it doesn't add to the general productivity of the country?
No, and this is again something that's not very well known, that asset transactions, financial transactions, even property transactions, they're not part of GDP. It doesn't add to GDP, to income, national income. It may generate profits and returns for the speculators, but it's something that's totally unsustainable and only results initially in asset inflation and ultimately in an asset market crash. Basically, the rule is only credit creation for productive purposes in the when banks create credit for the investment in the creation of new goods and services. Only that is sustainable, and also that's what enables income streams to service the loans and repay them. Because when you've got productive investment, that generates its own income streams.
Right.
But if you lend for consumption, then the credit creation has not triggered any any income stream that's now helping to repay that loan.
Right.
And the same is true for asset markets. Now, if the asset for financial credit creation, it will look initially as if this is going to work, and everyone is quite happy about it, because by pushing up asset prices, everyone is making more money. The speculators are making money. The banks think, their deals are paying off, so this is quite a safe loan. They may do some more. But because you're pushing up asset prices, it's a sign that it's unsustainable. While banks continue to expand credit for speculation, they will continue to raise asset prices. And while that is taking place, it looks sustainable, but it's not.
Okay. Right.
Because it's dependent on banks continually increasing credit for financial speculation. The moment, for some reason, banks slow or stop this, and this is of course what happened in the banking crisis, there can be various triggers that stop this. Asset prices come down, speculators go bust, banks have non-performing loans, and you will get a financial crisis. So this is also a form of undesirable form of credit, credit for financial speculation.
So you've had one good form of credit creation and two bad you've given us.
That's
so
right.
We need to cut out the bad, hopefully, and promote the good.
Exactly. Now, how can this be done? We're often told, well, the markets will take care of this, but I think it should be obvious to everyone by now that markets don't deliver the optimal outcome. Quite the contrary, actually. When you look at it from a bank's perspective, the bank will generate bigger profits and bigger bonuses in the short run.
Right.
And of course, people are incentivized to focus more on the short run there by creating credit for financial speculation. So that's what they love to do. Also, it enables banks, because of course there's constant mergers and amalgamation of banks, they're getting bigger, so it enables banks to have bigger deals, because that basically helps banks to increase their returns on assets, return on equity, by having lots of small customers, small firms, small and medium-sized enterprises. The banks will have a much higher cost per pound lent. But if they can lend big money to speculators, hedge funds, they will appear to be very efficient. But of course we know this is unsustainable, and for the whole economy is highly inefficient. This shows that the market outcome is not desirable. So we need intervention. We need to intervene to make sure that banks are creating credit for productive purposes.
Right. Wow.
Now, yes, intervention is a bad word with some people, but basically when you intervene in the credit market, you need less intervention in the rest of the economy. Many people are also skeptical, can intervention work? And it has worked, it has been done very successfully by the East Asian miracle economies, if you want to call them that, Japan, China, and so on. And also we mustn't forget that actually this credit allocation is constantly taking place. It's the bank managers that do this allocation of credit, and they only think of the bank's interests in the short run. If we tell them, well, look, you must, if you want to keep your job, for example, look at what's good for the economy, and therefore cut out the bad credit for loans for speculation, or an undue emphasis on consumer loans. If we give bank managers an incentive to lend for productive purposes, we will get a better economic outcome. So it's quite easy for intervention in this area to be very successful and have very positive impact.
But a difficult thing politically, it changes the whole culture of who decides. The matter is not really discussed in the media or the press. We have seen the idea of a green bank, What do you think of that? Do you think that's the way forward? Would that help?
Well, I think it's one of the possible avenues to go, to say we set up government banks which focus on doing the good lending. And I think that can be part of a strategy, of a better strategy. But also we shouldn't forget that the majority of the money supply is created by the commercial banks. And just to set up one or two banks, big society bank or green bank, while letting the commercial banks continue to run haywire and lend for speculation, that's not going to be sufficient. Right. So we also need to put incentives in place for banks to rein in the harmful credit for speculation and for consumption, and focus on the productive credit creation.
Right. I mean, the government own or have a large part of ownership of very big banks anyway, so it wouldn't be too difficult to start that process now.
Exactly, it would be very easy. Unfortunately, the government in the UK has decided voluntarily to say, we don't want to intervene in the banking system, and we don't want to tell the banks how to create credit, who to lend the money to,
right.
Despite the fact that the government owns a big chunk of the UK banking sector. But that's purely a political decision taken by the government. It could easily intervene and therefore result in a more productive allocation of resources, and higher growth, and less inflation, and therefore sustainable. Also from an environmental perspective, because you can build in environmental energy efficiency targets in your credit direction.
Right, say what you want, and the system will produce it if you set it up like that.
Precisely.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Watch out for more videos on specific banking reforms.